Are you ready to navigate the new way to work? Forbes Books presents Dare to Care in the Workplace with Kathleen Quinn Botaw. Here's Kathleen.
I'm here once again with Simone Stolzoff, the author of The Good Enough Job. In our conversation, we have been delving into the themes of the book, particularly how it examines the consequences of expecting more from work than just a job and the definition of a good enough job. Simone, can you share with us how the notion of identity related to our work varies across genders?
It's a good question. I think one of the most interesting trends that I capture in the book is, around the late 1970s, the average American and the average French and the average German worker all worked roughly the same amount of hours each year. But in the 40 years since, while our peer nations have continued to decline the amount of hours that they work, some subsets of Americans are working more than ever. Today, the average American works 30% more than the average German worker. And a lot of this change has been driven by college-educated men in particular. And, I think there are more pronounced gender discrepancies depending on what metrics or what data sets that you're looking at.
Sure.
I think particularly for college-educated men, work is one of the greatest sources of self-worth in their lives. Whereas in decades past, they might have been able to derive more meaning and faith from a social group like the Moose Club or a religious organization. Today, for a lot of men, the workplace is their primary source of community. It's their primary source of purpose, and their self-worth is directly tied to either their output or their productivity or how much money they're earning. And it's a precarious place to be in because, as I mentioned, your job might not always be there, or maybe one day you hear a, slightly negative piece of feedback and it can spill over to all of these other aspects of our lives as well. And so part of the sort of mission of the book is to help inspire people to take an active role in investing in sides of themselves beyond work, which requires both carving out the space to do things other than work and filling that space with active forms of community building and leisure and relationship development so that we're not just going to work, coming home, going to sleep, rinsing and repeating.
That sounds awful, doesn't it? I mean, when you put it that way, it sounds really awful. How about, did you do any work on women or people of other genders?
Yeah, I definitely interviewed a fair amount of people through the lens of gender. And I think it was very pronounced, especially speaking to stay-at-home parents or folks whose labor is not always valued or seen in society. And also through the lens of mothers in particular, once they lose that ability to parent on a more daily basis. So I'm thinking about empty nesters whose kids go off to college or sort of losing that identity as a mother for one reason or another. And, I think like the general nature of the discrepancies between men and women might allow women to naturally have some other sources of meaning and identity in their lives through their relationships, through their roles as a parent or something else, as an active member of their community. And yet I think the risk is similar in that if you are solely looking to your identity as a mother to be your sole sense of self or your sole means of making meaning in your life, it's just as risky as, looking to your 9 to 5 for the same goal. It's not always going to necessarily be there. And so the more we're able to cultivate these different self aspects, the more healthy and resilient we'll be in the face of adversity.
Excellent. Really great advice. What would you say to those college graduates about ready to venture out into let's get a job because that's what I went to school for. And, I think you said these, scripts we all have in our head that we're supposed to do this and that. What advice would you give them coming out to find the good enough job?
Yeah, I don't envy the position of someone that's just entering the labor force for the first time right now. I think there's so much social cachet that people are placing on their jobs. And even if you look at social media and TikTok and Instagram, there's so much content about look how much money I make, look how cool it is to do this work that I'm doing. My advice would be to think about both what you value and what the market values, and try and look at work in a way that can marry those two. Because I think too often, certain young people just look at the workforce through the perspective of what the market values, what can pay me the most money, what is most available to me. And I think that can lead to hopping onto a career ladder that you don't actually want to be on, or playing a game that you don't ultimately want to win. But I think the other end of the spectrum is just as risky. If you are only thinking about what you value without considering what the market values, it can put you in a position where, for example, you're assuming large amounts of student debt to pursue a degree that might not actually lead to job prospects on the other end. Or you're an artist, but you're so preoccupied by your ability to make rent that you're not actually able to focus on the art that you want to create. So it's a tricky balance to find, but my advice would be to be thinking about the intersection of that Venn diagram of what does the market or the world value, what do I value, and trying to find a line of work that sits at their intersection.
You sound like you have a great relationship with your parents and your family. So how do they have that conversation with their parents and family?
Yeah, I mean, we all inherit so many scripts about what role work should have in our lives from an early age, either explicitly or through observation of the ways in which our parents work. I think for parents, it's very important to let your kid have some autonomy. I think about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And if you're teaching kids just to pursue a certain major or a certain line of work because that is something that you want for them, it might rob them of the intrinsic motivation to find what they themselves care about and be motivated by other sources of validation beyond sort of the approval of their parents. And so that's one of the big things that I would consider in any sort of conversation with your parents, is understanding that when we give advice, myself included, we're often trying to justify our own past decisions or projecting what we want from our own lives onto other people. And while it's important to, consider others' perspective, no one is going to be able to direct your career or find work that serves the role that you want work to serve better than you will. So maybe take into account the opinions of others, the parents, the guidance counselors, the mentors. But at the end of the day, the best way to find a career path is to really be thinking about what it is that you value, what it is the market values, and trying to make those decisions yourself.
Really great advice, Simone. I love that. And I want to touch on, your poetry. You got a poetry prize when you were in college. Can you tell us more about your journey with poetry?
Yeah, I mean, that feels like many different shed layers of skin ago for me. But yeah, as I mentioned, I studied poetry in college, and I really got my start in writing through performance poetry, through spoken word. And so that was one of my main sources of community in college. And ultimately what led me to become a writer was by being part of a collective of other poets and other writers in college. And we would go from campus to perform our words. And yeah, it was a great source of community, similar to a sports team or an a cappella group. My sort of extracurricular just happened to be a lot of people that really valued the written word.
Beautiful. I love the written word. And is there a particular poem that you gives you strength or makes you calm? Is there one you'd like to share?
Yeah, so many. I mean, not to be too cliche, but I've always been a big fan of Mary Oliver and the way in which she evokes so much feeling from the natural world. The poet that I mentioned earlier in this recording, Anis Mojgani, is an amazing poet. I suggest you look him up if you aren't familiar with his work. And it's this great combination of being able to think about how poetry was primarily an oral medium to begin, and the way in which poetry and rhetoric and storytelling are so often experienced first through the ear as opposed to the eyes, as well as poetry that can be very much appreciated on the page. And marrying the two, I think, is a lot of what brought me to the place that I'm at today, where, not only do I write, but I speak. I love talking. I love connecting with people. And I can attribute a lot of that to some of the early sources of poetry inspiration that I had when I was a student.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it's really, the written word is very different than the spoken word. And so many people forget that. And the beauty of words and communication. And I think we've lost some of our ability to communicate verbally and through the written form through this digital age we're in. What would your opinion be about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes and no. And on one hand, anyone who has a phone has the ability to be a writer. We're writing all day long in the same way that anyone with a phone these days can be a photographer. I do think that the value of very well crafted and considered or even edited work is at a premium in this world of seeming abundance of different writing and different forms of everyone sharing their opinion. I do think you can stand out from the crowd by being a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more considered, and really treating writing as a craft. But I think in general, the democratization of writing and giving many more people a platform, many more people vehicles to share their work and connect with readers is ultimately a good thing. If you think about the kind of Western canon of the types of folks that used to be read or get exposure, I think it serves us all that the face of who is representing sort of the American writing world, for example, looks very different now than it did 100 years ago. So I'm encouraged by the ways in which some of these platforms are democratizing people's ability to express themselves and share their opinion. And I'm hopeful about a world where more people feel empowered to write and to share.
But hopefully they don't use artificial intelligence to do so. Because I think that's a rise that people are saying, hey, I have an idea. Let's go to one of the chats and let's have them draft it for us. And then we'll put our feelings around it.
I mean, we'll see. I think we're at an interesting moment in time. And obviously, you and I are both writers. We've derived a lot of meaning and pleasure from really grappling with words over the course of our lives. And I wonder the ways in which tools like artificial intelligence will augment people's abilities to be able to write, and what ways in which it will replace people from having the process of producing written work. I think the jury's still out. It's a little too early to say, and the ways that some of these tools will incorporate themselves into different folks' writing process. But I'm not maybe as fearful as some of the doomsayers that believe that all of the writing in the future will be done first and foremost by machines.
No, I think the editing process, as you probably have learned, and I certainly have learned being the author of 2 books, is the secret sauce. It's really the editing process and the voice that is the beauty, I think, of writing and making sure the passion comes through it. You talked earlier about the fact that you're from Italian roots, and what lessons can some of us take from the Italians? Who I've been to Italy twice, and I love the way Italian people live their life. It's just prego, prego everywhere. Everybody's happy. What lessons can we take from your heritage?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily unique to Italy, but I think there are lots of lessons to be learned from cultures other than our own. And I think it just starts with a matter of prioritization. So my whole mom's side of the family is from this small town in Puglia and kind of the heel of the Italian boot. And almost every day, the town sort of stops for riposo, which is sort of like the Italian equivalent of a siesta for a few hours, where people have time to tend to their non-work priorities like food and family and other things. And it's just a different way of orienting people's lives and their days. You know, there isn't this same sense of grind, productivity culture where capitalism is not just a measurement or an economic system, but a moral good in the way that it is here. And I don't think, it necessarily just has to be Italy. You can look at a lot of the Latin American countries, for example, or other countries in Western Europe or in Asia to see how there are other ways to orient our lives apart from having work being the central axis around which the rest of our life orbits.
Yes, I agree. And I think travel is a gift when you can see how other people live and work. And I emphasize live and then work. I'm from Irish descent, and I saw that. I've been to Ireland many, many times, and I experienced that as well. So the more you can travel and experience the way other people move through this journey we call life is really wonderful for for you to feel more empowered to take control of your life. Because in my opinion, in our Dare to Care in the workplace opinion, is everybody works to have a good life. And it sounds like in the Good Enough Job, we want to have a good enough job to have a good life. And that's the premise. And it can have meaning, but it doesn't have to mean everything.
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, a job, as I mentioned before, first and foremost is a way to be able to support our life. And certainly it can be much more than that. But I think being clear-headed about its primary purpose, to earn enough money to live, is beneficial.
Beautiful. Well, Simone, thank you so much for joining me today. How would people find you if they wanted to find you, order your book? Tell us how to get to you.
Yeah, well, the best way is to go to thegoodenoughjob.com. As I mentioned, this is my debut book, so every order counts. And you can learn about the book and find me on social media. I'm at Simone Stolzoff, SIMONE STOLZOFF, on all the major platforms. It was such a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, Simone.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And that will do it for another episode of Dare to Care in the Workplace. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you automatically get my new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love if you could leave a review on Apple or Spotify so more folks like yourself can discover the show. Until we meet again.
This has been Dare to Care in the Workplace. To connect with Kathleen, go to KathleenQuinnBotaw.com. Kathleen's book, Dare to Care, is available wherever books are sold. Dare to Care in the Workplace is a production of Forbes Books.